Hi, what's going on? This video is about 2-point landings in DCS warbirds. It assumes a basic level of familiarity in 3-point landings and general flying. We're going to cover what a 2-point landing is, when you should do one, how to do one, and finally, how to address some common faults. If you've watched any of my other videos, you'll have heard this disclaimer before, but for those of you who haven't, my aviation background is in gliders and tailwheel aircraft. I'm not a real-life warbird pilot, and I'm really nothing special as a pilot. 2-point or wheeler landings, as we call them in Australia, are considered a relatively high skill level activity in the aircraft, and there are a lot of tailwheel gods out there who've been nailing 2-point landings longer than I've been alive. That being said, I am fairly confident in my ability to teach you how to conduct this procedure safely in DCS. So, what is a 2-point landing? As seen here in the classic war movie 633 Squadron, a 2-point landing is a landing where we land a tailwheel aircraft on its main wheels first, as opposed to a 3-point landing where we attempt to land the aircraft on all 3 wheels at once. Hence the term 3-point. Now, why would you do a 2-point landing? There's a few key reasons for this, but to explain the main one, it's helpful to understand what a 3-point landing is in a bit more detail. 3-point landings are also known as full stall landings, and the reason we call them this is because the 3-point attitude is generally also the stall attitude for these aircraft. Therefore, to execute a 3-point landing, what we're doing is essentially stalling the aircraft just off the runway, allowing it to settle onto all 3 wheels at once. To do this, we're also safely taking the aircraft right back to its stall speed. But what does any of that have to do with 2-point landings? Well, when we have a crosswind, for instance, the wind might be gusting or changing direction. This means that the conditions are more unpredictable, and therefore taking the aircraft close to its stall speed and then safely executing a full stall landing can become much more difficult to do safely. This can look like the aircraft abruptly stalling when the wind speed changes, or being unable to track the runway center line at the critical moments before touchdown. I'll touch on this more in a later video on the physics behind why tailwheel aircraft are so nasty on the ground, but in short, touching down with the wheels at an angle to the direction of the runway is very dangerous in a tail dragger. So this is where the 2-point landing comes into the picture. Wheeler landings allow us to come in faster, thus limiting the impact of a crosswind and enabling us to maintain control authority for longer. Wheeler landings also allow us to safely set the interwind main wheel down first, and then the remaining main wheel. This is a must for maintaining the center line in a crosswind. Wheeler landings also give us enhanced visibility over the nose. This again helps for tracking the runway center line, but it was also practiced as a method for formation landings in World War II. For those who are interested, Bud Anderson talks about this procedure during his time as a P-51 pilot. So, how do you do a 2-point landing? To explain this, we're going back to our virtual whiteboard, Microsoft PowerPoint. The first part is the approach. A 2-point landing begins with a much shallower approach than a 3-point landing to enable us to smoothly establish level flight just above the runway. To do this, we generally add at least half the wind speed to our usual approach speed. In heavier aircraft like the P-47, however, be prepared to add a bit more than that to arrest the rate of descent, so use your best judgment here. In terms of the attitude, we should be looking for a nose-low attitude here for the approach. We make life quite difficult for ourselves if we allow the nose to get high, and if you do get nose high, it's generally safest to go around or commit to a 3-point landing if safe to do so. The next phase is the round out. Ideally, we should aim to round out to straight and level flight just a few feet above the runway. To achieve this, we control the rate of descent with the power, generally feeding in power to slow our rate of descent until we're at straight and level flight just above the runway. It can help to transition your gaze to the horizon during the round out as well. This will greatly aid in being able to judge your height and subsequently establish level flight. Once the aircraft is rounded out, the next step is touching down. This is where the most finesse is required. There are a few methods to doing this, but the one that we'll cover today is called stair stepping. To stair step with the aircraft established in straight and level flight, we simply push the stick slightly forward about an inch and then return it to center. We then repeat this process, stepping the aircraft down until the mains touch the runway. Most simulator peripherals have much less travel than a full-length stick, however, so you might need to make even smaller forward presses on the stick to achieve this. You might also find that instead of gripping the stick with your whole hand, transitioning to using your fingertips, like writing with a pencil, might give you better dexterity in achieving this. The key here, after being gentle with the controls, is to be very patient. It's natural to want to force the aircraft down too fast, but this will generally always result in a bounce, which will simply undo all of your hard work. The 2-point landing is not a short-field landing technique. It takes quite a bit of runway at the start, and it's very normal to not even touch down the first few times you try it. Take your time and make only very small stick movements to avoid touching down with too high a rate of descent. You will need to touch down with very little to no rate of descent to avoid a bounce. This process will become much faster with practice. Once you feel the aircraft touch down, you will need to simultaneously check forward with the stick while you reduce the power to idle. Remember not to anticipate this, or you may find yourself having a prop strike. Once you've touched down, there are a few schools of thought on this, but the safest method is to lower the tail down under control instead of trying to keep it up for as long as possible. The reason for this is that if you keep the tail up for as long as possible, the tail plane will only start to fall once it's stalled. As a result, you will not have elevator authority. And if you don't have elevator authority, you probably won't have any rudder authority either. Without rudder authority, you'll find it very difficult to keep an aircraft like the Spitfire with a free-casting tail wheel pointed straight once the tail is on the runway. Once the tail is on the runway though, the rollout is the same as for any other landing. Keep the stick pulled back into your stomach, exit the runway when able, and conduct your post-landing administration. Now, let's see what that should look like from the cockpit. For this demo, we'll use the Mosquito. Firstly, because it's a very nice aircraft and we've already seen some clips from 633 Squadron today. And secondly, because it might come in handy for V for Victory when the Mozzie gets its own campaign. Beginning with the approach, we begin stabilised on a nice shallow final leg at 130 miles per hour, 5 miles above our standard approach speed. The aircraft is correctly configured, and I loosen my grip on the stick here to ensure I'm correctly trimmed out. This makes the round out much easier. As we come to just above the runway, we round out to straight and level flight, giving it a bit of power to arrest the rate of descent. Once we're happy that the aircraft is sitting comfortably in straight and level flight, we begin stair-stepping, pushing the stick forward an inch and then allowing it to recenter. We step our way down until we feel the mains touch. As they touch, we push the stick forward to maintain that level flight attitude and reduce the throttle to idle. Now we slowly reduce forward pressure on the stick, lowering the tail under control. As we do so, the nose will want to yaw to the right, so we feed in a bit of left rudder to keep the nose central. Once we feel the tail wheel contact the runway, we pull the stick into our stomach and keep the nose straight by dancing on the rudder pedals. And there you have it, the 2-point landing. Now, while that looked fairly straightforward, most people's first wheeler landings will look something like this. This is very normal, and bouncing is one of the enduring parts of flying a tailwheel aircraft. If you bounce and there's only a limited or no crosswind, the best option is to then convert to a 3-point landing. Hold the aircraft off just above the runway and take the nose to the 3-point attitude for the flare. Ensure the aircraft is tracking the center line for this. If you bounce and there's crosswind and or limited runway remaining, then going around is your best option. There's no shame in this, and most people take a little while to get the hang of wheel landings. If you find that you're gliding forever above the runway, it can be useful to have a bit of nose down trim coming into the hold off. This will ensure that you continue to descend and don't just glide forever. And that takes us to the end of the video. I hope you found this video informative and that your 2-point landings start coming along well. If there's anything else you'd like to see, please let me know in the comments below. Cheers.